So we've just had a look at this. This is the sort of, you won't normally find Exeter soup ladles. You certainly won't find them that have been reworked in Limerick, I promise you that. But these larger pieces, the ladle, the basting spoon with pristine marks, they're uncommon. Anything like this, anything early, anything from the first 50 years of the 18th century is in nice condition. There are a few beaten up things knocking about, but in lovely condition. They are rare now. Hollowware is rare. In a perverse way, I would say the earlier spoons are more abundant. I think families kept them because they weren't a great weight in silver and they had more sentimental value, which is why they've survived in rather large numbers and you see them in collections. When you get to the later 18th century, when you get past 1760, almost all the production are sugar tongs, tablespoons, some buckles, although buckles are quite rare to find, even though they made quite a lot of them. I think many of those have been melted down. And you will find occasionally small things, little punch strainers, maybe a wine funnel, bottle labels, wine labels. Lots of those survive. Well, we say lots, well, comparatively lots of them. But sugar tongs, and it's not that I've got a fetish about sugar tongs, but lots of Exeter pears survive. And they're beautifully, if you go back and you look at the short video I did a couple of weeks ago on Exeter bright cutting, they're just absolutely gorgeous things. All different makers, are hard to date sometimes. These two pairs have a standard mark and a duty mark, a cameo duty mark. So we know these have to date after 1786. This pair, which is very similar, only has a standard mark, therefore it dates before 1784, before the duty mark was introduced. And obviously if you've got a pair with an incuse duty mark, that will date between 1784 and 1786. So you can date these things roughly, and you can also look at the working periods of the goldsmiths that made them, and that might help you narrow them down as well. When we get into the 19th century, much more silver starts to be produced at Exeter again. There's more money about. So you start to find tea sets. You'll start to find things for the middle classes, or snuffers trays, baskets, salvers. Certainly as you go on, a lot of the bigger firms are actually the firms of Williams in Bristol, and they produce a great deal of silver, all sent to Exeter for assay. So it will be Exeter marks, but made in Bristol, and you will see christening mugs and all manner of things, tea strainers, infusers, lots of things, tobacco boxes, snuff boxes. Boxes in Exeter are rare. There are a series of freedom boxes that were made in the middle of the 18th century, Plymouth freedom boxes, if you're lucky enough to find one of those. But snuff boxes tend not to be 18th century, they tend to be 19th century, if you can find one at all. Lots of spoons. Williams, which is the big Bristol company, they specialised in making all sorts of things, but they specialised in flatware. And they made absolutely tons and tons of these, and they all survive, thankfully. These are by William Woodman of Bristol. So you can see that it's not just the Exeter trade, it is centres like Plymouth and Bristol that pull Exeter through the doldrums as you're collecting. These are, I mean, you might look at these and think a pair of plain fiddle pattern spoons. They are engraved for the same owner. They are a pair. They haven't been put together. Yet one bears marks for 1836 and the duty mark of William IV. One bears marks for 1837 and the duty mark of Queen Victoria. And the reason is that these marks had to change at some point. There was a time where they said, right, we're changing the date letter. And this is what's happened. You have a parcel of silver, maybe a set of 6 of these going through. One is marked on one day, one is marked on another. It's quite rare to find a pair of spoons that actually straddle, or a pair of anything that straddle the change of date letter, but it does happen. So there's lots of interesting things to collect. But if you get a hallmarking guide, which is, have this one, I'm not plugging it in particular, there are other hallmarking guides available. It will tell you almost everything you generally need to know. If we look at that, those are a very small example of the pre-1701 date letters, and then you have all the systems there. But it is possible to collect Exeter silver on a budget if you want to buy tablespoons or you want to buy bright cut sugar tongs. They abound. I mean, they're not as... When I started to buy these, you couldn't fail to go to a fair and find a pair of these for 10, 15 quid. Can't do that anymore, I'm afraid. They are a little bit scarcer, even scarcer online now, but you can still find them, and they will be 30, 40 pounds. One of these pairs, which is, I think those are by Jason Holt, who's quite rare. Those are by John Manley of Newton Abbot. He is the only Newton Abbot silversmith that submitted wares to Exeter Assay Office. His work is quite rare. Those two pairs are very similar. This Jason Holt pair, because they have acorn bowls, might cost you 40, 50 pounds from a specialist. I have seen a collector for a John Manley pair pay 250 pounds. So you can get lucky with rarities as well. Earlier silver pieces like the strainer, you are talking about serious collecting there. This is probably the only sort of Plymouth strainer of this period on the market. It's not really on the market, but you sort of get the gist of it. Things like a William and Mary Exeter wine taster, normally these are things you see in museums now. Occasionally they come up at auction, occasionally, or with a dealer, but you know that's hard. But as I say, the early spoons, bizarrely, these pieces which are 350, 400, 450 years old, Elizabethan examples, they are surprisingly abundant. Of course, they aren't cheap. They are thousands of pounds. But you can find them. So you can put together, unlike the other assay offices, where I think you would need to be not a multi-millionaire, but you need to be fairly wealthy to even consider buying Elizabethan silver from York and Chester and Newcastle. If you could find it, I don't think you could actually. You might be able to find one piece from Chester, one or two pieces. Exeter, it can be done. Slow and steady wins the race. So that's a very brief look at Exeter, mainly because there are so many good books on the subject. There's West Country Silver by the late Timothy Kent, West Country Silver Spoons. There are many articles in the Silver Society Journal. There's Miles Harrison's excellent book on Exeter goldsmiths, which has every conceivable maker's mark you could wish to find, apart from all the ones that he's found since he's published the book, but I'm sure they'll be coming soon as well. So there's lots of references and sources for this, but this is just a brief look to say what is possible to collect and find with Exeter, and the answer is quite a lot. Especially if you cast that umbrella a little bit wider and take in all the silversmithing towns around Exeter that are broadly described as West Country silver. So we'll leave that there. That's quite enough, isn't it? 2 lots of me this week. And next week, something else. Possibly we'll get on to York. That will take some time, as many of you might know. That's my particular hobby horse. So yes, if I can bear and build up to do it Next week we might do York. No promises. But until then, goodbye and good antiques hunting.